Hello, welcome to On Giving. Today, we're going to have a thoughtful conversation at the intersection of philanthropy and the greater good. I'm Liz Newpel, President and CEO of Skystone Partners, where we believe philanthropy is a powerful force for good. Today's conversation is about the role of community foundations in today's day and age, and I'm excited about what's in store. Before we begin, there are a couple of side notes, couple of housekeeping things to be attentive to. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we're recording our conversation today. We'll wrap up right at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We also do have room for questions and answers in addition to the interview. Please put them into the Q&A module, which is awesome. And Adrian will bring those forward later. And it looks like chat is disabled. Well, we're delighted to see you all. If you'd like to introduce yourselves in the Q&A, that would be fantastic. That is also where we'll put our questions and answers today. As always, it's meant to be a thoughtful conversation among friends who care deeply about philanthropy. No slides, just substance. So to get rolling, I'd like to welcome our guests here today. We have two leaders in the community foundation field whom I respect tremendously. We have Matthew Randazzo, who is the president and CEO of Greater Cincinnati Foundation, our regional practice lens, and Mary Thomas, president and CEO of CFLeads, our national field lens. Mary and Matthew, welcome. We're so glad to see you here today.
Delighted to be here. Thank you.
You're good to be here. Thank you, Liz.
Excellent. Thank you. So recently, we've all felt some volatility, most visibly from the federal shutdown. But the bigger story I think that we wanted to talk about here today is how community foundations are evolving. Today, we'll be exploring how you all are how the community foundation is evolving as a catalyst, aligning public dollars, private capital, and community voice so that help arrives faster in crisis and our civic scaffolding grows stronger afterward. So both of you have made the choice to work every day to make the world a better place through the vehicle of the Community Foundation. And before we dive into sort of the meat of things, I'm curious, and I am certain our guests are curious as well. Why did each of you choose to work in a community foundation setting rather than, let's say, a university, a zoo, hospital, or arts organization? Who'd like to go first, Mary or Matthew?
Ladies first.
Okay, excellent.
I'll go first. Well, thank you, first of all, Liz, for having me here today, and of course, to be with Matthew. That's an interesting question. Why did I choose to work in a community foundation? And I chuckled inside because I don't know if I chose this. I was actually working and leading an institutional ministry of the United Methodist Church in the inner city of Spartanburg. Was
Mhm.
working with women and children who did not have access to health care or child care, the things that any family who's trying to thrive would need, all of those necessities of life. And I was doing the work, and the Community Foundation was paying attention to the impactful work that we were leading.
Uh-huh.
And the board members, the trustees, sent the new CEO to my office for a visit. I thought he was coming to offer a grant, but he actually came and offered me a job. And, I'm sitting there and I'm doing the work, and he comes in with a little sticky note, and he says, "Mary, I care about the community. I have a lot of," yes, that's exact, but it was yellow. Yes,
Okay.
yeah, he was a banker, and he moved over to the Community Foundation, and he said, "We've been watching you. We've been observing the work that you're doing and leading this incredible organization and really helping to lift these families out of poverty by providing childcare, well baby checkups, all of the family support services. And we need someone to bring community into the foundation, into the
Mm,
community foundation, because they were clearly operating as a charitable bank. And it took me by surprise.
mhm.
But 2 months later, I decided we're going to do this. And
Yeah,
so I landed in the community foundation there, here in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and I've never looked back.
wonderful.
I took everything with me, all of my community capital, all of my street credibility, all of my relationships and all of the work that we had done for 11 years there in the inner city. He wanted community, and we brought community into the community foundation.
There you go. So the community foundation identified you as a community foundation person before you even knew it.
Yeah.
Indeed, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Matthew, how about you?
Well, I love that story, Mary. And Liz, thank you for having me today. I spent the first 18 years of my career working in K-12 education, mostly focused on educational access and equity, with a real bright focus on college access and then STEM equity. How are we getting more kids of color connected to the STEM workforce and opportunities? And when I was leading a large national STEM education organization, I was also a fellow at the Annie Casey Foundation in their Children and Families Fellowship Program. And I began to really reflect on a career that had focused on a single sector. And I reflected on my own personal experience as someone who grew up very low income on the west side of Detroit. Education was huge. It was the catalyst that allowed me to be on this call today. But I also reflected that I had folks that were helping around food and housing insecurity and domestic violence and all of the other parts that were necessary for me to be able to show up to school ready to learn every day. And so I really got this fever for working beyond a single sector. And as fate would have it, the 38-year veteran at the Dallas Foundation was retiring. And I got a call and was asked to throw my hat in the ring. And that was 9 years ago, 8.5 years ago. And I'll say, I'll answer just a slightly different version of your question. What keeps me in community philanthropy today, what I love most about my work, and this is not hyperbolic, I learn something new at least every single week in my role.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's wonky, it's tax and tax policy or regulatory challenges or opportunities, but most often it's sitting with a donor or a civic leader in the community who has an interest in something that I know virtually nothing about. And it really just piques my curiosity to lean into that learning with them and to think about how a community foundation can help really create good throughout our region. And so I quite literally every single week learn something new as a result of those relationships. And that's what keeps me here. I think it's a really special thing.
Wow, both of you just blow me away with the how I got here or why I stay here, because you've got the community. You really put the community in the community foundation. Both of you. That's what I hear you say, that is the vital thing that either got you there or keeps you there. So, Mary, across community foundation leaders you're hearing from this month or in the past couple of months, what's the one signal that captures this moment and why?
I think the one signal that I continue to hear resonating across the field, whether you're large community foundation, small, rural, urban, is a focus on mission.
Mm,
A focus on mission is our why. It's the why. I spent 25 years in the community foundation, and I really appreciate what Matthew said about learning something every day.
hmm
We're in the business of being nimble, being flexible, and being committed to a cause greater than ourselves. And it's our mission that gets me up in the morning.
hmm
And when I'm in the room with the community foundation leader, whether I'm in Massachusetts or whether I'm in Idaho, these folks are committed to their mission, serving the folks in their place-based work and figuring it out together. There are problems and challenges that some of these things we can't even explain. But at the same time, it's the people that we serve um, who reminds us of why we get up each morning. So if the goal is to make sure that families are healthy, secure, and that they can thrive, then how do we make that happen? And here at CF Leads, our goal every day is to get up and think about how we help community foundations exercise their leadership muscle to
Hmm.
be what the community needs it to be, whether it's a grant maker, a convener, a facilitator, a problem solver. But the main thing here is the partner relationship, is that we're not working in isolation. So what does it mean for the Community Foundation of today to be a partner, inclusively uniting its people, resources, and institutions to tackle some of the most complex problems of our time? So
Hmm.
that's the signal for me is mission. You said one, so I'm gonna stop there. Mission, but
Mission.
yeah,
Yeah,
a focus
mission.
on mission.
Hmm. And I'm just gonna put a little asterisk or a little additional there. Mission and the responsiveness, helping each foundation be truly responsive to their community's needs, right?
Truly
Yeah.
responsive, yes, and
Hmm.
as I said, the ability to be nimble and to
Hmm.
have and to have the appropriate tools and the right tools in your toolbox that can meet folks where they are. Because
Hmm.
we're in an ever-changing environment, and if we're using the same tools we used 20 years ago, it's not going to work today. So what are we doing to keep, as Stephen Covey shares in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, sharpening the saw? Is
Hmm.
that we have to continually look for ways to stay ahead of the curve, to stay sharp, to know that if we're working as an isolated entity within place-based work, the results are going to be minimal, in my opinion. I mean, I say that from my own experience. I was in a community foundation that had plenty it was resourced very well. We didn't ask, they didn't ask for anybody to help, but at the end of the day, um, we found that our most effective work was when we were working with others, whether it be local government, the United Way, the institutions of higher learning, the collective impact of working together
Hmm.
versus working alone.
Right.
As the quote goes, if you really want to accomplish much, work together with other people. Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much.
Absolutely. You're leading me to my next question, but I want to throw one over to Matthew real quick before I ask you that follow-up question, Mary. But Matthew, kind of along the same lines as it relates to what's happening now. Here in
Mhm.
Cincinnati, you recently, a couple months ago, back in I think July, announced your really ambitious new strategic plan. The headline was, we're going to invest $1 billion into our community within the next 10 years. And at the same time, with current events, we're all walking on a little bit of shifting sands right now. So, my question for you is, what has changed or stayed the same with your rollout of this exciting plan? Because I know you have three main pillars, there's
Yeah.
a big dollar amount attached to it. So, what has changed or what has stayed the same in light of now?
Liz, I love that question, and I think this is the question of the time for community philanthropy, and that is how do you balance a long-term vision for community well-being? How do
Hmm.
you have stick-to-itiveness to make the hard calls and to make patient investments in organizations that you are confident can improve the community? And
Hmm.
how do you balance that with the on the ground lived reality of our friends and
Hmm.
neighbors? And
Hmm.
let me say plainly, there's so much that has happened in 2025 that was not on my bingo card. My
Yeah.
bingo card is full of surprises. And so I think with our board, we really had a deep conversation to say we are going to continue to focus on education and housing and community vibrancy. We are going to continue to center equity, particularly in our work around educational outcomes
Hmm.
and affordable housing. Here in Cincinnati, we have a 50-point literacy gap between Black and white students at Cincinnati public schools. We have a 40% gap in the rates of homeownership between Black and white residents, among the largest homeownership gap in the country.
Hmm.
Um, some of the challenges that our community and nonprofit sector is facing, it puts us at risk of growing those gaps and not turning the curve. So by and large, we are continuing to be committed to this idea that we have to close these known equity gaps. And um, we heard loud and clear from nonprofit partners that they need capital, they need it quickly, they need it deployed. So we launched, we did a strategic draw from our grant making corpus above our annual distribution. We put a couple $1 million into what we're calling a Better Together fund.
Hmm.
That's funding nonprofit capacity building, shared services, and everything up to and including potential nonprofit mergers and acquisitions, which is a scary thing for some nonprofits
Hmm.
here. But we just know that we needed to put a menu of options on the table and say to our nonprofit partners, you choose which option is best for you.
Mhm.
Hmm.
But really putting a high priority on mobilizing resources quickly. And then the other thing that we've really focused on, and I'll give you a super tactical example, is just trying to activate the generosity of our fund holders.
Hmm.
GCF has 1,200 active fund holders. They're on track this year to do over $150 million in grant making to our region. It
Hmm.
is unbelievable how far above our weight this region punches in terms of its generosity. And we
Mhm.
love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But sometimes we have to lean in. So when we saw the government shutdown and we saw SNAP benefits, we mobilized our fund holders. We identified some trusted partners into the community. We encouraged them to make contributions. Within 10 days, we saw over 100 grants totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars that went out to food pantries, our big regional food bank, to pantries that are closest to community in churches in some of our most historically disinvested neighborhoods. So it's just, I think it's really finding that balance and knowing that sometimes we have to sort of go all in and meet the current need, while at other times we have to have the courage to take the long view. And I think that's the dance. At least that's the dance I feel. I'm
Hmm.
waltzing with my board and with
Yeah.
our community partners
Mhm.
almost every day.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. The waltz is the single most difficult ballroom dance, in case you're curious.
Well, that's good to know. No one wants to see me do any kind of dance, but waltzing will be at the very end of that list, clearly.
Indeed, indeed. Well, that sounds like it's quite a balancing act, and it leads us into, for me, sort of what is catalytic in practice. And this is really for the both of you. So if grant making is the floor, and Mary, you talked about helping your community foundations be responsive to their unique community's needs. Matthew, you talked about how you mobilized in that area in Greater Cincinnati. But if grant making is the floor in catalytic community foundations, what does the ceiling look like for community foundations in 2026? And are there trade-offs? And how do you move into that more transformational space?
So for me, when I think about grant making being the floor, and as you say, what is the ceiling? For
Hmm.
me, is when the community's voice is amplified.
Hmm.
One of our core competencies here at CF Leads is amplifying community voice. And it's certainly something I spent 20 years doing at the Spartanburg County Foundation, the oldest community foundation in South Carolina. And you know, there are many times we would have these meetings. You go to meetings and meetings and meetings, and it's the same people, same solutions, same results. And oftentimes it's because the people whose lives we're trying to make better are not a part of the problem's solutions, if you will. They're not a part of the solutions, if you will.
Hmm.
And so I worked very diligently with our board of directors to help them understand why it was necessary to include the community's voice in the decisions that we were trying to make, if you will. And in 2003, we started something called Strengthening Voices, and it was funded by the William Randolph Hearst Foundation
Hmm.
out of New York and the Mary Reynolds Babcock Foundation that funds in the South, 13 states in the South they fund. And we started out of the Strengthening Voices initiative something called Grassroots Leadership Development Institute.
Nice.
And this whole idea was around this is when we all started talking about capacity building back in the early 2000s.
Hmm.
So the goal here was to provide capacity building grants to nonprofits, but in doing so, we wanted to also equip the people that they served with the tools to be ambassadors and change agents.
Hmm.
And so over the last 20 years, 500 new leaders have graduated through Grassroots Leadership Development Institute. These are individuals who are not your leadership Spartanburg or your leadership Cincinnati. These are folks who are deeply rooted in their community and they're accountable to the leadership in their community. So
Mm-hmm.
these are the real folk who show up at city council, county
Right.
council. They're
Yep.
doing the hard stuff. And so for me, the ceiling, when we think about community foundations, is yes, make the grants, but also include the people, in the convenings and making sure that the table is large enough to hear from the folks who they're living these problems every day. And many of them have the answers. They just don't have the capacity nor the resources to do what need to be done. So we know from experience that that is where the real magic happens, when
Mm-hmm.
the community is also a part. The community is a part of the solution. So let's make
Right.
the table large enough to hear
Right.
from them.
Excellent. Thank you. That's wisdom in action, Mary. Matthew, what about you? What if grant making is the floor for you? What about the ceiling?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I think about the ceiling, how do we scaffold to that? I think that
Mm-hmm.
scaffolding is built for GCF at least on I'll call it three primary pillars.
Mm-hmm.
One of which, and I think this is a miss for a lot of community foundations. I'm just gonna be candid, and Mary can arm wrestle and debate me real time. I think many community foundations have an obsessive focus on raising unrestricted capital and unrestricted giving so that they can do grant making. And
Mhm.
and I think that is an important tool, but it one often competes with our local nonprofit community.
Mm-hmm.
And two, it undervalues the advising and support role that we can play with fund holders. So
Okay.
one of those pillars is how is GCF in this moment educating, activating, and even influencing where and how our donors are giving. And
Mm-hmm.
some of this, I mean, Liz, some of this is really simple in our notes to fund holders. It's unrestrict your grant. Make it more timely. Make your grants mid-year instead of December.
Mm-hmm.
Send a nice note to your favorite nonprofit leader, thanking them for the work that they're doing in community. Really trying to lean into more trust-based principles with individual donor advised fund holders who this year in Cincinnati, again, will do 140 to 150
Mm.
million dollars of grant making on their own. So educate, activate, influence. Like that's part of how we get the social and political capital that comes along with the grant making when we have our fund holders aware of issues and really helping to support them directly. So that's one of the scaffolding.
Mm-hmm.
The second is very similar to what Mary said, and that is GCF is really investing in more grassroots like organizing efforts. So, through a partnership with the Cincinnati Regional Business Committee, Private Foundation, and the United Way, GCF is the lead investor in an initiative called Organizer Zero, which gets mostly moms, but parents from Cincinnati public schools trained and activated to go and frankly to hold our school district leaders, both staff and board members, accountable for results. The
Mm-hmm.
reason this community better knows that there's a 50-point gap in the literacy rates between black and white students is because it is parents that are out testifying at these board meetings that are happening and calling on our elected officials to come up with a plan to close that gap. One of the lines was, we need to move from celebration, from one of our parent leaders. I love this line. She said, we need to move from celebration and toward accountability.
Nice.
So, so this idea of how are we really leveraging grassroots support? We have a huge NIMBY problem with housing in our community.
Mm-hmm.
No one wants density in housing. And what happens is three or four or five, or even a community sometimes full of more wealthy and better resourced individuals can completely derail density and housing development, which we know we need in order to drive rents down and create affordability
Right.
not just for the lowest income in our community, but for our teachers and police officers and firefighters. So how are we leaning into a similar infrastructure that is combating the NIMSYism that has plagued this country around housing and the development of affordable housing? The third pillar, and this is so wonky and I hope folks don't fall asleep when we describe it, but it's really this idea of how are we building out a longer term infrastructure for shared understanding of how our community is doing and a shared vision for where we want to go. And so we have partnered with, in this case, the Cincinnati Regional Chamber to develop a community scorecard. We've attempted this previously in Cincinnati 3 or 4 times. And when the going got tough and the data wasn't moving, boards quietly killed those dashboards.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? That is why we have not seen the gains that we need, particularly for low-income residents in our community, because we didn't have the courage.
Right.
So we're partnering with the business community to come in and say, no, actually, these are the things we need to build a thriving and vibrant region. We need to know how we're doing relative to year-over-year gains or losses, but we also need to benchmark ourselves against peers and aspirational cities. We want to understand why Charlotte and Atlanta are doing a hell of a lot better on a lot of these measures. I want to know why Columbus, Ohio can permit 3 times as many houses as Cincinnati, Ohio can, right? And
Hmm.
we want to find solutions and really deploy them. So the activation of donors, really thinking about how we're mobilizing folks closest to the solutions, to Mary's point. This isn't a deficits-based framing. This is how are we getting the parents and community members who know the
Mm-hmm.
most about their community into positions of power to speak
Mm-hmm.
with people with privilege. That is
Mm-hmm.
hugely important. And then finally, how are we building out this shared infrastructure that we know how we're doing? We can be honest, we can hold a mirror up, we can celebrate our wins, and we can be accountable for the improvement we still need to make. That to me is the ceiling. And
Mm-hmm.
we're going to lean into it and try to figure it out.
And may I add something here? And listen, I'm not going to arm wrestle with you because I agree with everything you just said there. And I'm going to tell you, for me, the ceiling also is when you can see the results of what you have deposited into the community working.
Yeah.
It's working and you're not even there.
Hmm.
I talked about these 500 leaders. I was in Fort Worth, Texas last week, and there was an uproar in this community because a Christmas tree was dug up out of a historic black cemetery and put downtown um, at a particular corporate's headquarters because of Hurricane Helene's when it destroyed this other tree that they had. Anyway, this is about a tree, okay?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But
But
it's an
here's
important tree from an
it's
important piece of
it,
property.
it's an important
Yeah.
tree, and the officials didn't think anyone was going to pay attention to what happened. Well, it was the grassroots leaders in this community that got every television station in the upstate on the case. They're the ones who organized. They're the ones who held the city officials responsible. It's a happy resolution now, but they made it happen. They just got an African American lady was just elected to be commissioner for the water district here, which is a big deal because her district is not represented by. It's basically um, we talking zip codes over here, 29302. That's where the wealth is. But
Hmm.
she was able to defeat a very prominent person in that community.
Hmm.
These folks are really leading, and the community foundation was not involved in any of the action that happened, but they provided the tools that empowered the people to get the results that they wanted for their neighborhood. To me, that's the ceiling when the work that you have deposited manifests in action on the ground.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like I almost regret that verbiage of talking about a ceiling because really you're building the scaffolding. And to me, it feels like maybe there is no ceiling because we all stand on the shoulders of the people who've come before us, or we all build on the scaffolding of the people who've come before us. And the joy today is seeing, as you said, Mary, seeing things working when you're not even there, but you
Mhm.
know that you have invested in a program that invested in the people that were the systems makers, the change makers, and the people who really bring people together.
Mhm.
That's amazing. Yeah. I have a lot of questions and I'm just a little bit dumbstruck right now
Mhm.
because of the power of what both of you are accomplishing, from a national level in your own communities alike. I do have one though that I would like to lean into before we go to questions. And if you do have questions for Matthew or Mary, I see a couple of them are starting to pop up in the Q&A, but do feel free to put those in there. And Adrian is going to be our question moderator today. But one of the things that I am curious about when we're talking about grassroots organizing leadership, when we're talking about people making a difference and speaking out in their community and helping people who've been historically disempowered have the power, the organizational strength, and the voice to move forward on things that matter in a community. I am curious in what could be a potentially really polarized or polarizing environment.
Mm.
Who is an unlikely partner that you've kept at the table?
Hmm. Wow.
Well, now you're dumbstruck.
For me, I would say at CF Leads, an unlikely partner. Um, that's a, I don't know. Um, I'm thinking maybe, I don't want to say the National Civic League, but I am going to say the National Civic League because they work in the democracy space.
Mhm.
You know, community foundations, oh, I mean, I've been in it for a long time. We haven't been talking about democracy and civic health and all of these things, but we're in an environment now where we're so polarized and there's so much divisiveness in our world, in well, I'm going to say in our country right now. How do we bring some civility back to the marketplace? How do we show up in the marketplace and we're able to get along, as Rodney King said? Can we all get along? But here's the deal: people are still living every day with complex problems, and we can't allow the powers that be to have such rhetoric that it makes us think that we can't work together at the local level.
Mhm.
And so for CF Leagues, and I have to come back to who we are in my seat that I'm sitting in now, working with the National Civic League arms us with the tools and the resources necessary to help community foundations focus on your local community. What can you do within your local place-based work to center yourselves around your values, the things that you share, the things that you care about, regardless of where you sit politically? How do we help lift up our local communities in a way where they are inspired and they don't feel like the world is falling apart every day, although things around us may suggest that. But at the end of the day, we've seen here recently our local communities stocking food pantries and making sure that people who were threatened and felt like they would not have their SNAP benefits would be able to eat. I mean, local communities came together despite the national rhetoric.
Right.
And my question, my answer here again is the National Civic League for us at CF Leads, because again, we want to make sure that our work is really driving what can happen in place-based work with
Mhm.
community foundations.
Thank you. I love that. I
So,
love
Liz, I'm
that.
going to give you a spicy take here.
Woo! Okay.
I think foundations, not or philanthropy, not specifically community foundations, have inadvertently helped polarize our communities. I
Mm,
think for a long time we have had primarily a deficits-based frame with how we talk about our communities. We have talked about everything that is broken. We have assigned blame. And I think what we have done is played into this hyper partisan national narrative that is very much us versus them. And it just depends on where you live on the country of who's an us and who's a them.
mhm.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
so I think the superpower of community philanthropy is that we are one of the last institutions. And I do believe this. I think we are among the last institutions that can have a broad tent,
Mhm.
that can invite stakeholders from various political perspectives. And so I think in some places we have seen this sort of pushback against business community, or we've seen a pushback against donors with this idea that donors are hoarding wealth. And
Mhm.
that's not the lived reality we have here in Cincinnati,
Right.
right? Our donors are wildly generous. They're getting resources out to the
Mm,
community. Our business community has been a fabulous partner to the work that we're doing. So, in some communities, the unlikely partner might be the business community, but not in Cincinnati.
mhm.
Cincinnati has a rich history, decades upon decades
Yeah,
of business and civic leaders coming together with philanthropy to lean into the work. And I think, the results are we are having community-wide conversations with elected officials, business leaders, nonprofits, and residents in communities alike about what is it going to take to move the needle around student achievement? What kind of investment is it going to take to really build affordable housing at scale so we can once again be a community where
yeah,
people can afford to live and work in the same place?
right.
And so I think those unlikely partners are, in fact, those other sector partners that I think have been left out of the philanthropic narrative by and large, or they have been positioned a bit as the boogeyman in the
Mm,
last decade. And we're saying, no, we can't solve any of this without you.
right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Wow. And two perspectives that I didn't expect. And Matthew, I'm enjoying my job because I'm doing the same thing as you, learning something
Mhm.
new and wonderful every week, every day. Right now, we're going to take a little breath from my questions. I know that we do have some questions that have come in through the Q&A module here in our webcast, and Adrian Taylor with Skystone Partners, who's actually sitting over there at Greater Cincinnati Foundation today, with it around the corner from you, Matthew. But Adrian's got a couple of questions I know that have come through the lines as we've been talking about these important issues.
Yes, and I just want to say I've been over here amening by myself to what's been said on the call. And we also have a comment in here as well where someone was celebrating what you were saying, Matthew, about not in my backyard, housing, accountability, and vitality. So a lot of great nuggets have been dropped on the call. I'm going to start out with one of our questions that we just received. Community foundations often present transformational opportunities in our communities, but they also require taking risk by investing significant resources, political capital, and more. When such high risk or high opportunities arise, what are the first steps foundations should take to assess and potentially support them?
I'm gonna jump in here because I literally prior to this webinar was meeting with some municipal leaders here in the region, and we talked about this specifically. The one of the most important roles for philanthropy, I think, is to be first in and to be willing to put at risk some level of resources. As a community foundation, we can make a financial investment that frankly may go nowhere. We
Hmm.
can make a grant in something that is promising but high risk in a way that our public partners in particular, our municipalities, our school district partners, they're called to account at a different level by elected officials. And as a result of that, I think they tend to be a little bit more risk adverse. So one of the conversations we had with the development of our strategic plan is that we have to be willing to de-risk innovation. And so what does that mean at GCF?
Mm,
That means that we are willing to come in with risky capital. We are willing to be a first in, not a last in. We are willing to not just direct the dollars or invest dollars that our board directs, but be willing to invite our fund holders to be co-investors and co-creators of a brighter future, but to really read them into here's the risk and here's the reward. That said, I think we have to pair that appetite for risk with a continuous learning orientation.
hmm.
I think philanthropy is somewhat notorious for I remember the like 80s infomercial. It was for some kind of cooking device which is like maybe an air fryer today, but her tagline was set it and forget it. I don't know if anyone remembers that infomercial. I probably stayed home sick from school a little too often. But philanthropy does have a little bit set it and forget it mentality. And I think Mary and Liz, you both said like what worked 20 years ago isn't going to necessarily work today. And
Mhm.
the rapid change in our community and in our political landscape, what worked 18 months ago may not work today.
Right.
Like being willing to lean in, to learn from those failures. But on the other end, we have to have a compact with our public partners to say, if we're putting in the risk capital and we are getting positive gains and we are turning the curve on behalf of community against any number of issues,
Right.
we need you to be a partner to take that solution to scale through public funding.
Hmm.
And so that is, I think, the dance that we have to that we have to lean into. And so I think Jacob asked that question. Jacob, I think this big thing is going in eyes wide open, having really deep and thoughtful conversations with your board about what it means to take on risk and that what's the upside potential, what is, my wife is a clinical psychologist and she'll often say, what's the worst thing that can happen when someone's catastrophizing? What's
Yeah.
the worst thing? Actually, you need to have that conversation with your partners and with your board,
Mhm.
but you have to still take that aspirational frame to say, and if it works, public partners, here's our expectation of how we work together to scale this to serve more folks. So it's sort of the through line of how catalytic investment can really change community.
That's good.
Do you have anything to add to that question, Mary?
I'm sitting here like I'm in a master class. No, I don't have anything to add to that.
Yes.
I'm just sitting here saying I'm gonna put Matthew on one of our webinars.
That's right.
Very kind of you.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
My next question is kind of in the same vein, and I think it leans more into the actual work of the dance. So I guess Mary or Matthew, either one of you can answer this question. How have you or how do you specifically engage your donors or board members that are hesitant to embrace these new equity approaches in today's environment?
Well, again, I'm far removed from, I shouldn't say I'm far removed. We are not a direct service
Hmm.
organization. We advocate and we represent community foundations. Um, so I probably would have to defer to Matthew on that. I will say to you, when I was at the community foundation, however, um, working with our board members to get them to embrace equity and really stay the course in a very conservative, we're an ultra conservative community here.
Hmm.
It was not easy. But the way we were able to make any kind of inroads was using
Hmm.
data to really,
Mhm.
lift up the issue, make the case, and we were steady. We did not relent. We had to show our donors, we had to show our board why they needed to invest in a community that had been left out for many, many years, where the pizza people would not even deliver there. Um,
Wow.
a very high concentration of crime. Um, the zip code disparity there in terms of life expectancy was very low. But it was the School of Osteopathic Medicine from Virginia that put a $20 million investment into the north side of Spartanburg. And that was the genesis and the catalyst for really making the case for why we needed to lift all boats. That we had, folks had kind of put a little invisible wall around this particular community. But
Mm.
today, if you were to come into Spartanburg, you will see a community that has market rate housing, a federally qualified health center. Um, there are all kinds of opportunities there now that was not there 20 years ago. Blue Meridian Partners has invested $100 million for cradle
Hmm.
to career
Mhm.
opportunities. And it's a national best practice. Purpose-built communities strive together. All
Hmm.
of that is here in Spartanburg. In fact, they had the Harvard Education Redesign group here 2 weeks ago, and I had the privilege of speaking to them because we talked about the journey. It was not easy, but we had to continue again to use the data to make the case, and again to get folks out of their comfort zone, put them on a bus, and take them through the neighborhood and engage with the people. And now they're all in.
Hmm.
But it was a journey to get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Adrian, I would just build on what Mary said and underscore two pieces. Like, one, the journey, I think, is really important. So, when we were launching our strategic planning process with our board, that was early 2024, we really wanted our board to understand all the ways for the last 30 plus years that GCF has shown up around equitable outcomes. And one of those first milestones was the Women's Fund, which was
Hmm.
launched 30 years ago in Cincinnati to really highlight the state of women and girls and the gaps that existed in pay and health outcomes, et cetera.
Mhm.
And so for our board, it was a reminder we have been in this work for coming up on two generations.
Hmm.
And then what happened when we had challenges in over the Rhine and how are all the different ways we've shown up post COVID? So I think the journey and reminding them that this is an evolution of work that we have done for 30 years gives them the confidence to have the stick-to-itiveness, frankly. The other piece is that data-driven look. Most philanthropy boards are, half or more of their board members are folks that work in the private sector. At GCF, it's about 80% of our board
Hmm.
are current business leaders. And so the data-driven approach for us in the adoption of this new plan was to say, okay, we're going to shift from this macro level conversation about racial equity or racial justice, and we're going to get more specific and we're going to identify specific data points and targets. And it's going to be tied to education and housing. So it is tangible and we can account for our success or lack thereof.
Mhm.
And so I think that the journey and the storytelling coupled with the data-driven approach, I think can get us a long way. And so equity continues to be one of our organizational values. It continues to be the center of our community impact strategy. But it is highly focused in ways that we can measure and that we can show progress and we can invite community partners to be part of those solutions.
Great.
It is great. I think we
Mhm.
have time for one more question. Mary, you mentioned the institute that started back in the early 2000s. And in response to one of Liz's questions, you talked about amplifying community voice is the ceiling. And
Mhm.
I know in my space, in my circle, we are constantly hearing from those who are closest to the pain. But I would like to know from both of you what specific tools or practices have you seen be very successful in gathering and then incorporating community voice? And also what that lens of like managing dignity and integrity of bringing those people into these spaces to hear their stories.
Mhm. For me, I think it begins with values, having some shared values, and the primary value of respect, meeting people where they are. Many of these individuals that I'm speaking of don't speak the King's English, but they
Hmm.
speak English. So it's respect and humility from folks who may have always had what they need. They may not be coming to the table from a deficit kind of mentality. They may have always had, but now you have to come to the table with a sense of humility to say, I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to let go of some of the privilege in an effort to understand, to build bridges, to build community, because we all care about safe places for children to play. We all care about the elderly population. So for us with the grassroots leadership, it was about respect, again, humility, learning, um, and being transparent. Uh, you know, um, who is it? It is what is the guy's name? Brian Stevenson talks about proximity.
Hmm.
And I think that's one thing that I brought to the community foundation. Although I didn't grow up in the inner city, I grew up on a farm. My grandparents were farmers. So coming into the inner city was a big deal for me and my sisters. And so, I had to learn the language of the hood to be accepted. Um, and then, of course, even when I spent my time in Africa working to build a village for refugee children, I thought because I was black, they would accept me, but they didn't. I had to adapt to the culture. and then they call me Mama Mary. So it's like you have to become a part of the community, not giving up who you are, but at least level setting who you are in that space. And then, of course, having a real earnest desire to connect. You know, it's one thing to attend a community function because you know you should probably be there. But I've been in spaces where you have a couple of hundred grassroots leaders there, and mainstream community is there, and there's a reception that follows. But you'll notice in the reception, the community is there, but the other folk have left. Well, you're going to meet the people where the food is. You got to learn the culture, the cultural norms is what we've got to learn. If we're really trying to build community, there's some give there. You know, there's give and take,
Mhm.
and I just believe that um, this work is not hard in terms of building community and amplifying voice. It requires time and it requires meeting people where they are. And so that's what I would lift up and just say that, you know, if you're willing to put in the time, certainly the results will follow.
Mhm. Yeah.
I mean, now talk about the master class. So I think Mary has covered that topic, and I would say the only thing that I could add to that, Mary, is I think, and this was implicit in what you said, is we also have to be appreciably open to the fact that we don't have all the answers.
Hmm.
And I
Mhm.
think
Mhm.
I'm sounding like a super critic of philanthropy, but I think philanthropy tends to assume
Hmm.
they have the answer. And
Mhm.
if we're inauthentically in community connecting with folks,
Mhm.
and we don't have a genuine desire to know how their lived experience could inform a strategy, and we believe that we can do better on behalf of them as opposed to in partnership with them,
Hmm.
um, the community will sniff it out pretty quickly.
That's right.
Mhm.
And so I just think that appreciative openness to being wrong and to and or just this maybe I'll use the term a little bit more positive. Just a radical curiosity.
Mm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
What can I learn from these folks?
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's powerful. And I
Mhm.
think that leads to deeper, authentic conversations, which then lead to better, more sustainable solutions.
I'd
Mhm.
like to share an example of that. Well, I want to share an example early in my career at the Community Foundation. The CEO is not there anymore, so it doesn't matter, okay? So I was in a meeting with two prospective donors, two African American sisters, very distinguished educators. They came in to meet with the Community Foundation. They wanted to open a fund in honor of their mother. And they were sitting there. The CEO was very reserved. They were very reserved. And I was sitting there observing, like, why are they all reserved? We're humans. But anyway, they continued the conversation. And um, as the conversation progressed, they recognized his last name. And they asked the CEO, are you related to so and so? I'm not going to give out the names here on this webinar. Are you related to so and so? And he said, yes. She said, I used to babysit for you. And the whole room changed. The entire room changed
Mhm.
because there was some kind of connection there. So,
Mhm.
you know, I just believe that if we can figure out when we come in these places to really work to figure out what we have in common, more so than what divides us or what separates us, be it race, age, gender, whatever it is, we can start to have some sort of harmony and community wherever we are.
Mhm.
Now I'm the one giving the amen.
Yeah. That's right. That's
Didn't
right.
Maya Angelou say, you know, we are more alike than unalike, my friend? That's
Hmm.
one of her quotes. And I know we're getting close to time because we are having an outstanding conversation. Like our friend Nancy Russell already stated, I agree with you, but I am going to now turn it over to Liz for any final questions and to close us out.
Excellent. And thank you, Adrian, for moderating the questions so well. Matthew and Mary, we have 4 minutes left before we need to wrap up for the day. And I'd like to ask each one of you to think of one bold action or risk that you are admiring or taking that fits this moment? Just one sort of, this is like lightning round.
I like what United in Advance is doing. The bold statements that they're making. There are some philanthropies they can say what they want to say all day
Mm-hmm.
without the risk of their donors picking up the phone, calling and chastising them or calling them back. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm very inspired by the boldness and the courage that these folks are sharing
Yeah.
on their LinkedIn posts, wherever, pick up the Chronicle of Philanthropy. So you got agitators, spectators, instigators, participators, all of these taters, if you will. And everyone has their role, and they certainly have their role. And I'm inspired by the bold risk and actions that they're taking.
Wonderful. Big voices in these challenging times. How about
Mhm.
you, Matthew? One thing
Yeah.
you admire or you're doing?
I mean, what I admire and what we have to figure out how to do more of within our institution is there are so many community-based efforts to create spaces for um, well, I don't know how to frame it other than to say people who wouldn't otherwise be in similar spaces with one another,
Mhm.
whether it's because of race or gender or politics, and having these small but powerful conversations that highlight the humanity of one another
Mm.
and that take down the barriers that or the invisible fences, as Mary referred to in parts of Spartanburg
Mhm.
earlier.
Mhm.
I think that is so critically important at this moment. I think it's also important that it not be co-opted by institutions, but supported,
Yeah.
because I think that grassroots person-to-person connection that breaks us out of our algorithms on social media, that tears us away from our preferred news sources, and actually connects us genuinely with other folks that we don't get to see every day. I think it's the most wildly powerful thing we can do in this moment to really come together and focus on solutions because, as Mary said, we all want the same things for our community. We may have different policy approaches and we may have slightly different points of view, but we all want our kiddos to have great educational opportunities. We all want the ability to take care of our families and maybe even go on a vacation once or twice a year. We all want the ability to save in a college fund. We all want the ability for our children to do better than we did, and that is the connective tissue that keeps us, that binds. So we have to figure out how we can get those folks in conversation with each other. So that's the thing I think we need to do more.
I love that. I love that.
Mhm.
And to close us in the last minute here, Matthew and Mary, as I've been listening to what you're saying, there's a little book that was sitting over on the side of my desk over here. And I was in Knoxville doing some feasibility study interviews with for a client, and someone I've known for about a decade down there, after our conversation was over, handed me this book. She said, Liz, we're sending these to all of our friends as holiday gifts. And I'd like to encourage you all in what you're saying today, because this book is the little book on dialogue from the Nobel Peace Center, and it is entitled Those Who Listen Change the World.
Mm.
What I hear from you all is that you are listening. You are changing the world one community at a time because you're encouraging bold speech. You're encouraging bringing down those invisible barriers or those invisible fences so that we can have that diverse dialogue and really change our communities. So I'm just going to flag this. Go Nobel Center, but it was sitting on my desk, and I've read it and it's really meaningful. So I'd encourage everybody who's listening today as a follow-on, I don't mean to give homework, but as a follow-on to Matthew and Mary, the Nobel Peace Center actually endorses everything they've said today. Read the book. So thank you both, Matthew and Mary. Thanks to CFLeads and Greater Cincinnati Foundation for lending your time to us. I hope this was useful to everyone. Please come back for our next On Giving, and we'll be sending out key takeaways and resources in the next few days. Again, thanks so much, Matthew, Mary, Adrian.
Bye bye.
I'm Liz Newpel. Thanks for joining us.